It was a cold morning. The bank had just opened, and people were already lined up. Some were holding papers, some looking at their phones, and others just waiting quietly. At the very end of the line stood a man who didn't look like he belonged. His clothes were old and dusty. His coat had small tears near the sleeves. His shoes were muddy, and he carried an envelope in his hand like it was something very important. He didn't talk to anyone. He didn't look around. He just stood still, staring at the floor. The people near him started to notice. One woman took a step forward, pretending to check her phone, but clearly watching him. A man in a business suit whispered to the woman beside him, "Do you know him? He doesn't look safe." The woman shook her head. The man looked tired, not dangerous. But sometimes people are afraid of what they don't understand. His face was calm, but his eyes were heavy like they carried 1,000 stories. Still, he didn't speak. He just waited quietly. The line moved slowly. A child pulled at her mother's coat and asked, "Mom, why is that man so dirty?" The mother hushed her and pulled her closer. More people turned to look at him. One of the bank tellers behind the glass noticed too. She leaned toward her coworker and said in a low voice, "That man in the back. He's been standing there for 15 minutes and hasn't said a word. Do you think something's wrong?" The coworker looked. "Maybe he's homeless. Maybe drunk. Should we call someone?" The first teller hesitated. "Better safe than sorry," she whispered and reached for the phone. Meanwhile, the man continued to wait. He wasn't causing trouble. He wasn't yelling or making a scene. He just stood there, quietly holding his envelope like it had something important inside. He looked down at the floor, his hands shaking slightly, though it was hard to tell if it was from the cold or something deeper. The teller spoke quietly on the phone. "Hello, yes, I'm calling from Riverbank, First Trust. There's a man here. He looks strange, hasn't said a word. Just standing with something in his hand. We're a bit concerned." The 911 operator asked, "Is he threatening anyone?" "No," the teller replied, "but he's just off. We'd feel better if someone could come check." The call ended. Within minutes, a police car pulled up outside the bank. 2 officers stepped out, calm but watchful. They walked through the front doors and were greeted by the bank manager. He pointed toward the man at the end of the line. The man hadn't moved. People whispered. Some stepped aside to give the officers space. The man didn't react. He didn't run. He didn't even look up. One of the officers approached and said gently, "Sir, could we speak with you for a moment?" The man blinked slowly and nodded once. He followed them without a word. They guided him to a quiet corner near the manager's office. Customers watched, some feeling nervous, others curious. The line started moving again, but people kept glancing toward the back. The officers didn't handcuff him. They didn't raise their voices. They simply asked him to sit. One officer said, "Do you have some ID on you, sir?" The man reached into his coat slowly, carefully. He pulled out an old wallet, worn and faded. He handed it over. The officer looked at the name on the ID. He stared for a moment. Then he looked again. His eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in recognition. The name meant something. He glanced at his partner. The second officer leaned in to read it too. Both of them suddenly fell quiet. No one else knew what had changed, but the mood shifted. What started as suspicion was now something else: curiosity, maybe respect. The man remained still, not knowing that his name had just reminded someone of a forgotten past. Back in the lobby, the woman who had called 911 asked the teller quietly, "What's happening? What's wrong with him?" The teller shrugged, now unsure. "I don't know," she said. "He hasn't done anything. Maybe we were wrong." The quiet man just waited, and in the stillness of that moment, No one knew that they were standing in the presence of someone far greater than they had imagined. They had judged his silence, his clothes, his shoes. But they hadn't seen his heart. Not yet. The two police officers stood beside the quiet man, their faces calm but serious. People in the bank whispered to each other, watching from the corners. Of their eyes, the atmosphere had changed. No one knew exactly what was happening, but everyone felt the tension in the air. The officers gently guided the man toward a small meeting room near the back of the bank. The man followed them without resistance. His movements were slow, almost tired, but he didn't seem scared. He still hadn't said a word. He just held the envelope tightly in both hands, like it was the only thing keeping him together. Inside the room, one officer pulled out a chair. "You can sit here, sir," he said politely. The man nodded and sat down slowly. His coat made a soft, rustling sound as he moved. The other officer stood near the door, watching carefully. Not out of fear, but because something about the man felt different. The first officer spoke gently. "We got a call, sir. Some people were concerned. You seemed quiet. Can you tell us why you're here today?" The man looked down for a moment. Then he slowly lifted the envelope. "I'm here to pay off a debt," he said softly. It was the first time he had spoken. His voice was deep, rough, like he hadn't used it in a long time. The officers glanced at each other. "A debt?" one asked. The man nodded. "Not mine. It belongs to someone else, a friend. He passed recently." He said no more. One officer decided to ask another question. "Do you have any ID, sir?" The man pulled out his wallet again. This time, he didn't rush. He opened it slowly, carefully, like it held something sacred. He handed over a worn driver's license. The officer took it, looked at the name, and froze. He blinked. Then he looked at the man again, then back at the name. The second officer walked over and peeked at the license too. His eyebrows lifted in surprise. They didn't say the name out loud, but something had clearly changed. The first officer asked in a quieter voice, "Is this really you?" The man simply nodded. The officers stood in silence for a moment. The air felt heavier now, with danger, but with quiet realization. They weren't dealing with a random stranger anymore. They were sitting in front of someone whose name still echoed in their memory. The first officer stepped out for a moment, leaving the man with his partner. He walked quickly to the patrol car parked outside. He opened the onboard computer, typed the name into the system, and hit enter. Within seconds, files popped up. The man had once served in the military. Not just served, he had been decorated, a Medal of Honor. A news story from 20 years ago, a photograph of him in uniform, a ceremony where the mayor had shaken his hand. A different time, a different world. Then something happened years ago. A fire. A family loss. After that, the man had vanished. No one had heard from him since. The officer stared at the screen, then looked back toward the bank. They called 911 on him. He whispered to himself. He walked back in, slowly, deep in thought. When he entered the small room again, he nodded to his partner. Then, with a changed tone, he handed the license back to the man with both hands respectfully. "Thank you, sir," he said. The man looked surprised, but nodded once. He wasn't used to people showing him kindness anymore. In the main lobby of the bank, people were still watching. Some were curious, some were nervous. One woman whispered, "They're taking a long time. What do you think he did?" The teller who had called the police was staring at the door. She was starting to feel unsure. Maybe they had been too quick to judge. Maybe the quiet man wasn't dangerous, just alone. Just different. After a few minutes, the officers returned with the man. But they didn't treat him like a criminal. They didn't hold his arm. They walked beside him, one on each side, as if they were escorting someone important. The bank staff looked confused. No handcuffs, no raised voices. The man walked calmly back toward the counter, the envelope still in his hands. The people in line stepped back quietly, giving him space. The officers stayed near the door now, their posture relaxed, no longer on alert. They didn't explain what had happened, but their faces said everything. This man was not a threat. He was something else, and slowly, without a word, the feeling in the room changed. Eyes that once judged now stared with quiet respect. No one spoke, but everyone listened, and they would never forget the day they called 911 and met a man whose name reminded them that sometimes we don't recognize heroes when they walk among us because heroes are often the ones who speak the least. The small room was quiet. The man sat on the chair, still holding the envelope. His hands were rough, skin dry and cracked, like someone who had worked hard for many years. His coat was old, and the buttons were scratched. The silence in the room felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. One officer sat across from him, while the other stood near the wall. They didn't speak for a moment. They were both looking at the old driver's license in their hands. The name printed on the card wasn't just any name, it was one they had heard before. The sitting officer looked up and asked softly, "Is this really you, sir?" The man gave a small nod. "Yes," he replied in a quiet, calm voice. "You served." The other officer asked carefully. "Yes." The man replied again. "A long time ago." The officers exchanged a look. The name on the card belonged to someone who had once been called a hero. Years ago, there had been news stories about him. Photo of him in uniform, saluting in front of a flag. A man who had risked his life to save others in a war zone. He had been given medals, awards, and then he had disappeared from public life. The sitting officer leaned forward, interested now. "Why didn't you say anything when we brought you in? Why not tell them who you are?" The man looked down at his envelope. "Because it doesn't matter," he said. "I'm not that man anymore. I just came to pay something back. That's all." His voice was soft, almost broken. Not sad, but tired, deep tired. The kind that comes from years of pain, of carrying too much in silence. The officer wanted to ask more, but didn't. Something about the man's tone made it clear he wasn't here for attention. He wasn't here for praise. He just wanted to do what he came to do, and then leave quietly. The officer handed the ID back with both hands, a small sign of respect. "Thank you for your service, sir," he said. Sincerely, the man didn't answer. He just gave a small nod and stood up slowly, joints stiff from years of hard living. Back in the bank lobby, people were still standing in line, talking in low voices. Some were trying to peek toward the back room. The woman who had called the police was fidgeting with her purse, now unsure if she had done the right thing. The door opened. The two officers walked out with the man between them, but they didn't touch him. They weren't holding his arms. They walked beside him like they were guarding someone important. Something had changed. The way the officers looked at him. The way they moved. It wasn't about suspicion anymore, it was respect. People in the lobby felt the change. The whispering stopped. The man didn't look at anyone as he walked to the counter. The same envelope still in his hands. One of the officers stood near the door. The other gave a short nod to the bank manager, then quietly left. The man reached the teller's window. It was the same teller who had first whispered about him. Now she looked nervous. Her fingers trembled a little as she asked, "How can I help you, sir?" The man placed the envelope gently on the counter. "This is for the Mitchell family," he said. "It's to pay off their mortgage." The teller blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, did you say?" "Their entire mortgage." The man nodded. "But why?" she asked, almost without thinking. The man looked at her with tired but kind eyes. He saved my life once, a long time ago. I promised him I'd return the favor. He's gone now. But I can still keep my word." He didn't say anything else. The teller's hands shook slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside was a certified check with a large amount written on it. More than enough to clear the debt. Her eyes widened. Other customers were now staring. One man near the back of the line said softly, "Did he say the Mitchell family? I know them. Their father passed last month." Another whispered, "That's their old army buddy, isn't it? I think I saw him in a newspaper once." Bank. The manager came forward. He had heard everything. "Sir," he said, voice quiet, "would you allow us to contact the family and let them know?" The man shook his head. "No need. I'm not looking for thanks." He turned to leave, but the bank manager stepped forward quickly. "Wait. At least let me say something." The manager extended his hand. The man hesitated, then shook it. Firm, quiet handshake. No words. The officer by the door gave a small nod. As the man passed him, he said, "They didn't recognize you, but we do. Thank you." The man gave a small smile just for a second, then walked out of the bank, and just like that, he was gone. Like a shadow that had passed through, leaving something behind that no one would forget. The officer stood outside the bank, still holding the printed copy of the man's ID. His hands gripped it tightly, eyes fixed on the name. It felt familiar, but distant, like a name from a forgotten newspaper headline. He returned to the patrol car, opened the onboard laptop, and typed in the full name. The system took a few seconds to load. Then, suddenly, the screen filled with records. Military files, honors, photos, articles, the man they had just spoken to was once a national hero. He had served in a dangerous war overseas. During one deadly mission, his unit was ambushed. He was the only one who survived, and only because he risked his life to pull 3 others out of a burning vehicle. One of those men was Daniel Mitchell, the same man whose family now owed a mortgage. That day, the quiet man in the bank had dragged Daniel out while being shot at. He was awarded medals, honors, and even met the governor. But after returning home, his life slowly fell apart. A house fire took his wife and daughter. He had no family left. He disappeared from the public, avoided the media, and lived alone for years. He stopped answering calls. No one saw him again. His name faded from the news, and the world moved on, until today. The officer scrolled through the photos. One showed the man standing straight in a clean uniform, saluting proudly. Another showed him receiving a medal, tears in his eyes. And now, that same man had walked into a small-town bank in dirty clothes, holding an envelope. Quiet, alone, misunderstood. The officer closed the laptop slowly. His heart heavy back in the bank. The staff were still trying to process what had just happened. The manager searched the man's name online. As he scrolled, he too found the same photos. "This can't be real," he whispered. The teller who had called 911 felt a lump in her throat. She stared at the screen. "I thought he was dangerous," she whispered. But he was just quiet. One of the customers, an elderly woman, had overheard the name. "I remember him," she said softly. "He was in the news. They called him a hero. I cried when I read what he did." Another man, holding a deposit slip, said, "My father served with him, I think." Said he disappeared after losing his family. Never took interviews, never asked for anything. Now the truth was spreading quietly through the bank. Outside, the man had already disappeared. Kay had walked off down the sidewalk, slow but steady, heading nowhere in particular. He didn't need anyone to thank him. He didn't need a crowd to cheer. He had made a promise to a friend and he came to fulfill it. The police officer returned inside and stood near the manager. "Do you know who that man was?" The manager asked. "Yes," the officer said. "And now you do too." They stood there in silence. Suddenly, the quiet man's story didn't feel like a story anymore. It felt like a mirror showing everyone how quick they had been to judge. He hadn't looked rich. He hadn't smiled. He hadn't spoken. So they feared him. But behind his silence was a life full of sacrifice, pain, strength, and deep loyalty. A teenage boy in the bank, who had watched everything, whispered to his mother, "Why didn't anyone recognize him?" His mother didn't answer. She just wiped a tear from her eye and looked at the door where the man had walked out. Later that day, the story began to spread beyond the bank. Someone shared a post online. "We called the police on a quiet man at the bank today. We were wrong. His name is redacted, and he's a hero who came to pay off a debt for someone else's family." The world judged him by his coat. But he's carried more weight than we ever will. The post went viral. People began to search for him. Reporters reached out. Veterans spoke up, saying they knew him, served with him, owed him their lives. But he couldn't be found. No phone number, no address, no email. Just stories, memories, and silence. It became clear that the quiet man didn't want fame. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to keep a promise. And he did. The name that had once disappeared into history was now remembered again, not because he asked for it, but because truth always rises, even when buried in silence. And the town, that small bank, and the people inside it all learned a lesson they would never forget. Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who speak the least. Sometimes, a quiet man is louder than all the noise in the world. The man stood in front of the teller's window, the same envelope still in his hand. The teller looked at him, unsure of what to say. A few minutes ago, she had thought he was dangerous. Now, she knew the truth. He wasn't a threat. He was a hero, a quiet one. He gently placed the envelope on the counter. "This is for the Mitchell family," he said softly, "to pay off their house." The teller blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry, sir. Did you say their whole house?" The man nodded. His face was calm, but his eyes showed a deep sadness, the kind that comes from years of pain and silence. He didn't speak with pride. He wasn't bragging. He was just stating a fact. The manager walked over quickly. He had been watching from his office. "Sir, may I ask what this is about?" The man turned slightly to face him. "Daniel Mitchell," he said. "He saved my life once. Back then, I promised him I'd return the favor one day. He passed last month, so I'm keeping my promise." The bank manager didn't know what to say. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He slowly opened the envelope and took out the paper. It was a certified check, and the amount written on it was large enough to pay off the full mortgage. Maybe even more. "You didn't have to do this," the teller whispered. "I know," the man said, "but I wanted to." The people in line were watching. Everyone had stopped talking. Even the little girl who had asked her mother about the man's dirty coat earlier was now staring with wide eyes. The woman beside her leaned closer to another customer and whispered, "He came here to pay for someone else's house." He didn't say a word about who he was. He just did it. The bank manager looked at the man again. "We can notify the family. We can send them the letter." The man shook his head. "Don't tell them who it's from. I don't want them to feel like they owe me. But this is a big thing." "You're giving so much," the manager said. "I'm just giving back," the man replied. "Nothing more." The teller gently ran the check through her machine. Her hands trembled slightly. She had never done something like this before. The screen showed the transaction was valid, real. The check was as genuine as the man. Standing in front of her, she printed the confirmation slip and gave him a copy. "Would you like a receipt?" she asked softly. The man looked at the paper. and smiled slightly. "No need," he said. Then he turned to leave, but the bank manager stopped him. "Wait," he said. "Please, just tell me your name again." The man paused. He looked down for a moment, then replied, "It doesn't matter." And he walked away. The officers who had earlier stood by, watching carefully, now watched with respect. One of them opened the door for him. The other gave a quiet nod. The man didn't look back. He walked down the sidewalk, step by step, like he had done this 1,000 times before. No one followed him. No one dared stop him. They just watched back in the bank. The room felt different. The tension that had once filled the air was gone. Now there was only silence. A thoughtful silence. The teller sat down slowly and looked at her coworker. "I called the police on him," she whispered. "I thought he was dangerous, but he came here to help someone." Her coworker nodded slowly. "We all thought wrong." The bank manager looked at the transaction record on his computer. He saw the number. He saw the name on the check. And he saw the note written on the bottom of the page in small handwriting. For Daniel, a promise kept. He saved the note. He didn't print it for records. He didn't log it as just another payment. He saved it for himself because it wasn't about money. It was about something much bigger. Later that afternoon, the Mitchell family got a call from the bank. The widow picked up the phone. "Hello, Mrs. Mitchell? This is Riverbank First Trust. We just wanted to let you know. Your house is paid off. The mortgage is cleared." "What?" she gasped. That's not possible. It was paid today. Someone made a payment on your behalf." "Who?" she asked, tears already filling her voice. "We don't have permission to say," the manager answered, "but we thought you should know." She broke down on the phone. "Who would do that?" she whispered. The manager didn't answer. But he knew. The whole town would soon know. But the man himself, he had already disappeared. Just like he had years ago. Quiet, alone, but never forgotten, he had come. Not for attention, not for praise, but to keep a promise made long ago. And he left behind a gift that would change a family's life forever. The man walked out of the bank without looking back. His steps were slow but steady, like he had carried heavy things in his heart for a long time. The cold wind touched his face, but he didn't feel it much. His coat flapped slightly as he walked. He had done what he came to do. That was enough. For him, back inside the bank, no one moved right away. The room was still. The people who had once stared at the quiet man in fear now stood in silence, full of respect. Something inside them had changed. The teller who had called 911 sat at her desk, holding the receipt from the transaction. Her eyes were watery. "I thought he was going to rob us," she said to her coworker in a low voice. "But he came here to give." Her coworker nodded. He didn't want anything in return. He didn't even want his name to be known. The bank manager stood by the door, looking out the window as the man disappeared around the corner. He had worked in this bank for many years, seen thousands of people, but never someone like that man. Never someone who gave so much, said so little, and asked for nothing. The officer who had remained near the entrance slowly stepped forward. He removed his cap and held it in his hands. "You all saw it, right?" he said softly. "That man, he didn't want praise. He just wanted to keep a promise." A woman in the bank line said, "We judged him too fast. Just because he looked different." Another man said, "That's what's wrong with us these days. We think kindness has a face, a style, a look, but it doesn't." The bank fell quiet. Again, someone pulled out their phone and typed a message on social media. "A man just walked into my local bank. He looked poor, worn, dirty. Someone called the cops, but he didn't come to harm. He came to help." He paid off another man's entire mortgage, then walked away. No name, no thanks. Just quiet kindness. I will never forget this. The post began to spread. At first, it was just shared among a few friends. Then someone found an old photo of the man from a military award ceremony years ago. Then another person posted an article from the past. The story grew. People in town started talking. Not just about what he did, but how he did it. He never asked for applause. He didn't tell the Mitchell family who paid their house. He didn't accept a handshake from the officer at the door. He simply left, but his actions stayed behind, like footsteps that others could follow. That same evening, the Mitchell widow sat on her sofa, the phone still in her hand. She couldn't stop shaking. Her late husband had always told her about one man in his army unit. If anything ever happens, to me, he used to say, he'll come through. He always keeps his word. She had forgotten those words, but now they returned like a memory wrapped in love. She looked at the house around her, the home they had built together. The walls, the photos, the memories, now it would stay hers. Her children would grow up here, all because someone kept a promise. Later, the bank manager printed the confirmation letter and placed a copy in a small drawer with the note. For Daniel, a promise kept. He didn't file it like normal paperwork. He kept it as a reminder for himself and his staff that not all heroes wear suits and not all good deeds are loud. In the following days, the town began to change in small ways. A young man helped an old woman carry her groceries across the street. A teenager gave up his seat on a crowded bus. A store owner gave a free meal to someone who looked hungry, and when asked why, they often replied, "Because I read about the man at the bank." No one saw him again. People looked. Reporters asked around, but the man stayed hidden, just like before. He had not done what he did for the world to clap. He had done it for his own peace, and that peace now echoed through the hearts of everyone who had seen him that day. Even the child who had asked, "Why is he so dirty?" now whispered to her mother, "He was kind, wasn't he?" "Yes," her mother said softly. "He was kind and brave and good." That was all the child needed to know, and that was all the man ever wanted to be. The next morning, the sun rose over the small town, casting warm light across the quiet streets. But something felt different. It wasn't the weather. It was the people. Everyone seemed to walk a little slower, speak a little softer, and look at others a little longer. At the bank, the teller unlocked the doors and entered. She still had the printed receipt from yesterday, folded neatly in her pocket. She sat at her desk and stared out the window, hoping maybe, just maybe, she'd see that quiet man again. But he never came back. The bank manager arrived soon after. He didn't say much, but he walked to the back office and opened his computer. The file was still on his screen, the one with a handwritten note for Daniel. A promise kept. He read it again and sighed. News of the man had started to spread. The original social media post from the customer had gone viral. Thousands of people had shared it. Many left comments like, "This brought tears to my eyes," or "We need more people like this man." Then someone found his old military photo. The one with him standing tall in uniform, shaking hands with the governor. It had been hidden deep in old news archives, but someone found it and posted it online. The picture showed a younger version of the man, full of strength, pride, and purpose. His name was written clearly in the caption. That's when things changed. More people started asking, "Who is this man? Where is he now? Why did he do it?" Local reporters came to the bank the next day. They wanted to speak with the staff, the manager, the people who were there. "Do you know where he went? Does he live nearby?" But no one had answers. One of the officers who had spoken to the man was also there. He told the reporter he didn't want fame. He didn't want his name in lights. He just came to keep a promise, and then he left. A woman who had been in line at the bank that day stepped forward. She said, "I thought he was strange. I even moved away from him. But now, I wish I had spoken to him. I wish I had said thank you." The Mitchell family also heard the news. Though they were never told who made the payment, they saw the online post. The widow looked at the photo of the man in uniform and started crying. She showed it to her children. "That's your father's friend," she whispered. "The reason we still have our home." She went outside that afternoon and planted flowers near the front steps. She wanted to make the home look beautiful, not just for her family, but to honor the man who gave them this chance to stay. By evening, the town was buzzing with conversations. In coffee shops, diners, barbershops, and gas stations, people talked about the quiet man. Some said they remembered seeing him years ago. Others thought they had passed him on the street and never noticed. But everyone agreed on one thing. He had reminded them what real kindness looked like. One boy in high school stood up during class and told his teacher, "My mom says heroes wear uniforms. But I think sometimes they wear old coats and walk in silence." His teacher nodded and replied, "And sometimes the ones we ignore are the ones we should listen to most." That evening, a candlelight vigil was held outside the bank. No one had planned it officially. It just happened. People came with candles, stood in silence, and remembered the man who walked in, gave all he had, and disappeared. The bank manager placed a small photo on the wall. It wasn't large, just a frame with a picture of the man in uniform, next to a small plaque that read, "A quiet man walked among us. He gave without asking, loved without speaking," and reminded us all what it means to keep a promise. Over time, the story became part of the town's memory. Parents told their children, teachers told their students. Even strangers who visited the bank would ask, "Is this the place where the quiet man came?" And someone would always smile and say yes, right here. Though the man never returned, he didn't need to. His act had done more than just pay a debt. It had touched hearts, opened eyes, and changed the way people looked at each other. The world around them didn't change overnight, but inside, the people had. They were a little more patient, a little more kind, a little more understanding. All because of one man, one envelope, and one promise kept in silence.